If there were chariots found in the Red Sea, it would probably have something to do with the crossing of the sea.
We know that this incident occurred in the Red Sea. We can be confident that there is probably some evidence left behind there.
At the bottom of the Red Sea lies something historians never expected to find. Not one wreck, not two, but the remains of what appears to be an entire army. Divers report chariot fragments, horse bones, and human skeletons scattered across the seabed.
Is there any physical evidence on the seabed? Yes, there is, and we have some examples. Skeletons of humans, skeleton parts of horses and bulls, chariot wheels.
For years, it sounded like a myth. Now, new technology is revealing something far more disturbing, because if this discovery is real, it could challenge everything we thought we knew about ancient history. The $10 million secret. So, here's the deal. In late 2024, a small, highly secretive team of divers, engineers, and underwater archaeologists launched a private expedition. This wasn't a university-funded project you read about in a boring journal. This was a quiet, covert operation funded by private backers to the tune of over $10 million. They were equipped with technology that most archaeological teams can only dream of. Advanced side-scan sonar, military remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, with high-definition 4K cameras and hypersensitive magnetometers. They weren't just looking for old pots or a stray anchor. They were looking for something specific, something that mainstream science insisted did not exist. They were looking for the lost army of the Pharaoh. For decades, rumors and amateur reports had pointed to a very specific spot in the Red Sea's Gulf of Aqaba. The stories, often dismissed as fantasy, told of coral-encrusted chariot wheels, scattered bones, and the physical remnants of the Egyptian army from the biblical Exodus. For just as long, mainstream Egyptology and archaeology had laughed off these claims. They called it pseudoscience, a religious hoax, and wishful thinking. But this new team had a map. It was a map based on those old, ridiculed claims, and they had the technology to see what no one else could, or perhaps what no one else wanted to see. They started their search in a wide grid. For days, the sonar pulsed into the deep, scanning the seabed. Then the sonar operator saw it. Strange, symmetrical anomalies on his screen. These shapes were not natural rock formations. They were round, precise, and most chillingly, they were arranged in a long linear trail. The team was stunned. The shapes looked exactly like wheels, hundreds of them. They deployed the ROV, a small submarine robot, sending it down into the dark, cold water hundreds of feet below the surface. The sub's high-powered lights cut through the gloom. At first, there was nothing but sand and rock. And then suddenly, there it was. Emerging from the sand, a perfectly round shape completely covered in coral. It was without a doubt a wheel, an ancient spoked chariot wheel. As the ROV glided forward, its robotic arm brushing away the silt, another came into view and another and another. It was a debris field, a massive one. The site stretched for nearly a mile and a half. This was it. The team knew they had to go down themselves. This was too big to just observe through a camera. Elite deep-sea divers, many of them ex-military, prepared for a difficult and dangerous dive. As they descended into the silent deep, the sheer scale of the cataclysm became terrifyingly clear. This was not a single shipwreck. This was a military catastrophe frozen in time. The seafloor was a war zone. It was littered with the remains of a fleeing or perhaps charging army. They saw wheels with 4 spokes, 6 spokes, and even 8 spokes. This detail is a massive wow factor. Why? Because these specific designs match perfectly the different types of chariots used by the Egyptian army during the New Kingdom period. The 4-spoked wheels were older, but the 6- and 8-spoked wheels were the new high-tech stable designs used by elite warriors and the Pharaoh himself. Finding them all jumbled together was a snapshot of the entire Egyptian chariot corps. But it wasn't only wheels. They uncovered twisted metal pieces that looked like axles. They discovered what seemed like the tangled rectangular remains of the chariot cabins themselves, now just heaps of corroded bronze and hardened wood, all fused to the seabed by centuries of stubborn coral growth. What many people never realize is that the divers described an overpowering, unsettling sense of dread. They were drifting through an underwater graveyard, and then they discovered the bones. Tangled among the chariot debris, just as the old records had described, were bone fragments. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them. Some were obviously animal, the skulls, ribs, and femurs of horses, exactly where they would remain if they were still tied to the chariots. But others were clearly human. Spines, pelvic bones, and pieces of skulls, all scattered together in a chaotic, horrifying mess. This wasn't merely an equipment dump. This was the final watery resting place of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of elite warriors and their animals who all died in one sudden and brutal disaster. The unbelievable part: one diver sweeping a powerful light across a mound of coral noticed a faint, strange glimmer. Beneath the crust, something was gleaming, a dull yet unmistakable golden shine. This matched the most astonishing, most doubted claim of all, that among the army's wreckage was a single gold-plated chariot wheel, possibly belonging to a high-ranking commander or even the Pharaoh. They couldn't touch it. The coral had sealed it firmly in place. Trying to remove it would mean destroying it. The team recorded everything. They captured thousands of high-resolution photographs and hours of crystal-clear video. They understood that what they had uncovered could send shockwaves across the world. They had discovered physical, undeniable evidence that appeared to support one of the oldest and most fundamental stories in human history. But here's the twist. This discovery, as monumental as it seemed, also opened an enormous can of problems. It questioned everything mainstream Egyptology had taught during the past 100 years. And that is why, when the early findings were quietly presented to certain academics and institutions, the reaction wasn't exciting. It was silent. A cold, heavy, frozen silence. But the discovery was only the first piece. The location was the second. A bridge at the bottom of the ocean. So why this exact spot? What makes this particular stretch of the Gulf of Aqaba so unusual? Well, about that. This is where the story becomes even more unbelievable. The dive location wasn't random. It was selected because it holds one of the most unique and bizarre underwater formations on the entire planet. The Gulf of Aqaba, which separates the Sinai Peninsula from modern-day Saudi Arabia, is famous for being extremely deep. We're talking about a huge underwater canyon that in most areas drops down to 5,000 or even 6,000 feet. That's more than a mile straight downward. It is a massive, uncrossable trench. Attempting to cross it with an army of chariots or even by foot would be completely impossible. It is a steep cliff of dark water except for one very precise location. Right where the divers discovered the army, there exists a massive flat land bridge stretching across the entire Gulf. It's an underwater plateau extending nearly 10 miles from the shore of a vast beach in Egypt called Nuweiba to the coastline of Saudi Arabia. And here's the fascinating part. On both sides of this bridge, the seabed drops sharply into those 5,000 feet deep abysses, but the bridge itself stays relatively shallow. Now, shallow is a relative word. It still reaches about 900 feet deep at its lowest point, but compared with the mile-deep canyons around it, it forms a raised pathway. The sonar maps reveal it clearly, a distinct massive underwater road 10 miles long and several miles wide. This underwater pathway is the only place in the entire 100-mile stretch of the Gulf of Aqaba where an ancient group of people could have even tried to cross. What many people don't realize is that this geographic feature is a perfect one-to-one match for the ancient story. The biblical account describes the escaping Israelites being trapped against the sea with mountains on both sides and the Pharaoh's army closing in. The location at Nuweiba Beach fits perfectly. It's a massive, wide beach, but it's completely boxed in on both sides by steep, impassable mountains. The only way in is from the west, and the only way out is forward into the sea. And right there, at that exact location, is the underwater bridge. This geography is a huge wow factor because it's a detail ancient writers could never have possibly known. You can't see it from the surface. You can only detect it with advanced sonar. Yet the story they told points directly to this one-of-a-kind place. The geography itself becomes a huge silent piece of evidence, hinting that something historic and catastrophic happened right here. A corridor can also become a trap. The straight-line distribution of the artifacts, the mile-and-a-half-long trail of wheels and bones follows the path of this submerged bridge. It looks exactly like a group that was caught right in the middle of crossing. This location also explains why the artifacts are still there. The 900 feet depth protected them from storms, ship anchors, and looters for thousands of years. And the unusual currents created by the deep canyons on either side have trapped silt and sediment on the plateau. This sediment slowly covered the artifacts. And of course, the warm, clear water is perfect for coral growth. The coral acted like natural concrete. It grew over the hard surfaces of the chariots, the wood, the bronze, and the leather. Over thousands of years, the wood decayed and the metal corroded, but the coral preserved its shape. The divers weren't just finding wheels, they were finding wheel-shaped coral. They are essentially fossils of chariots. Without this exact geography and biology, any remains would have been scattered and dissolved into nothing long ago. This land bridge, this perfect crossing, also explains the scale of the discovery. An entire army with hundreds of chariots, horses, and soldiers forced into this narrow 10-mile bottleneck would be completely exposed. When the disaster struck, there was nowhere to escape. They couldn't go left. They couldn't go right. They were trapped. This deadly bottleneck explains the huge concentration of artifacts. It's a silent underwater witness to a catastrophic event. The fact that this terrain is so unique also helps challenge one of the main skeptical arguments. Critics often say, "Oh, it's just a random shipwreck." But here's the reality. This isn't a shipwreck. It's hundreds of military chariots, all from the same time period, all discovered in a straight path on the only possible land crossing in the entire Gulf. That's not a coincidence. That's a scene. This unique path wasn't discovered by accident. One man claimed it had been there all along. The vindication of a madman. This entire unbelievable story, the secret expedition, the sonar maps, the silent Egyptologists, it all traces back to one man. A man who was not a professor, not a famous archaeologist, and not part of the academic elite. His name was Ron Wyatt. And for decades, the entire world believed he was a complete crank. So here's the story with Ron Wyatt. He was a nurse and anesthetist from Tennessee. He was also a passionate, deeply religious, self-taught biblical explorer, driven by an unshakable, literal belief that the stories in the Bible were real, physical history. He spent his life and his own money searching for the physical proof. He was the definition of an amateur, an outsider, and that's putting it mildly. In the 1970s, Wyatt became obsessed with finding the true Red Sea crossing. He rejected the traditional Reed Sea theories, the small marshy lakes in northern Egypt. He followed the biblical clues, which he believed pointed to a massive body of water deep enough to drown an army. His search led him to the Gulf of Aqaba and specifically to the huge mountain-locked beach of Nuweiba. He reasoned with simple logic that if this was the place where the Israelites were trapped, then this must be the place where the sea parted. And if that was true, then the remains of Pharaoh's army must be at the bottom of the Gulf, right on that underwater land bridge. So in 1978, armed with basic scuba gear, a small boat, and a lot of faith, he did something no one else had bothered to attempt. He dived down. What he claimed to find was exactly what the new $10 million expedition just confirmed. He reported seeing coral-covered chariot wheels. He even claimed to have recovered a hub from one. He took blurry, grainy underwater photos which were easy to dismiss as strangely shaped coral. But he didn't stop there. On later dives, he claimed to have discovered more. He reported finding human bones and horse bones all mixed among the chariot parts. And he made his most explosive claim of all. He said he had found and filmed the legendary golden chariot wheel shining faintly beneath the coral. When Ron Wyatt presented his discoveries, the academic world didn't just ignore him. They mocked him. They tore him apart. He was labeled a fraud, a pseudoscience promoter, and a religious zealot who was simply seeing what he wanted to see. Egyptologists and archaeologists were frozen in a state of complete and total dismissal. And get this, Wyatt's other claims made him an even bigger target. He also claimed to have discovered Noah's Ark, the true location of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, right across from Nuweiba, the ashes of the red heifer, and even, most incredibly, the Ark of the Covenant hidden in a cave beneath Jerusalem. To the mainstream scientific community, this wasn't research. It was a fantasy-driven treasure hunt. His Red Sea claims were thrown out along with everything else. For more than 40 years, the site was dismissed as a myth, a conspiracy, and nothing more than choral and wishful thinking. But here's the twist. Ron Wyatt passed away in 1999, his claims still almost universally mocked. But he left behind his research. He left his maps. He left the exact coordinates of the underwater land bridge and the debris field he had discovered. The secret high-tech expedition in 2024, they weren't diving blindly. They were following Ron Wyatt's map, and their $10 million sonar and high-definition cameras were confirming one by one the unbelievable claims that the nurse from Tennessee had been making all along. The sonar confirmed the land bridge, the ROVs confirmed the wheels, the 4, 6, and 8-spoked wheels exactly as he described. The divers confirmed the bones, and they even noticed the glint of gold that Wyatt had reported. This is the center of the controversy. The experts who dismissed Wyatt for decades are now facing high-tech data that shows he was, at the very least, correct about the existence of a massive ancient underwater debris field. The discovery is forcing a rethinking of a man everyone had agreed was a fool. And it's forcing a frightening rethinking of how this impossible event could have ever happened. Because the how is where the theories become truly wild. Pursuing a stolen superweapon. This is the real mystery. If an army lies at the bottom of the sea, how did it end up there? The ancient account says the sea split open, the Israelites crossed on dry land, and then the waters crashed down on the Egyptian army chasing them. Modern science often says this can't happen, yet the clues still exist. So what truly took place in the Gulf of Aqaba? This is where the ideas start getting wild. Wild theory number 1, the volcano tsunami. This one is huge. What if the miracle was actually a perfectly timed natural catastrophe? Around 3,500 years ago, a massive volcano on the Greek island of Santorini, once known as Thera, erupted. It was one of the largest volcanic explosions in human history. The event was powerful enough to change the planet. This mega eruption, hundreds of miles away, would have produced a gigantic tsunami spreading across the Mediterranean. But something many people don't know is that tsunamis have a well-known and terrifying sign, the drawback. Before the massive wave arrives, the ocean suddenly pulls back. The water retreats dramatically, sometimes for miles, revealing the sea floor. For an ancient person who had never witnessed this before, it would appear miraculous, as if the sea itself had split apart. So here is the theory. The Israelites are trapped at Nuweiba. The Thera eruption triggers a huge tidal drawback in the Red Sea. The water withdraws, uncovering the 10-mile land bridge. It feels like a miracle. They rush across. The Egyptian army, spotting the path, charges after them onto the exposed, muddy seabed. But here's the problem. The drawback is only the beginning. The second stage is the returning wave. Just as the Egyptian army with its heavy chariot stuck in mud reaches the center of the Gulf, the tsunami strikes. A towering wall of water hundreds of feet high surges back into the Gulf, wiping out the entire army in moments. It's a scientific explanation that matches the story almost perfectly. The timing, the parting, and the crashing walls of water. Wild theory number 2, the Ark of the Covenant. This idea is even more extreme, and it connects directly to Ron Wyatt. Remember how Wyatt claimed to discover both the chariot wheels and the Ark of the Covenant? What if those discoveries are connected? What if the Israelites weren't only escaping with their families? What if they had taken Egypt's most powerful secret? Many alternative theories suggest the Ark of the Covenant wasn't simply a sacred box. They claim it was a piece of advanced lost technology, possibly a massive electrical capacitor, a powerful energy source, or even a weapon. So here's the new version of events. The Israelites, led by Moses, who was raised in Pharaoh's palace and knew its secrets, take this powerful device. Pharaoh becomes furious. He isn't only chasing runaway slaves, he's pursuing his super weapon. The Israelites become trapped at the sea. The Egyptian army moves closer. So Moses activates the device. The Ark of the Covenant releases a mysterious force, maybe a localized gravity field, perhaps a huge energy pulse that pushes the waters apart, forming a dry passage. The Israelites cross safely. The Egyptians, driven by anger, rush in after them. Once they are all inside the trap, Moses, or the ark itself, turns the device off. The walls of water held back by this unknown power crash together. The army is destroyed. This theory is extreme, but it answers many questions. It explains the pillar of fire and cloud, the energy-like power connected with the ark. It explains why Pharaoh would risk his entire elite army, and it explains the seemingly supernatural force behind the event. Wild theory number 3, forgotten acoustic technology. This one feels like pure science fiction. Some theorists suggest that ancient civilizations, maybe even one older than Egypt, understood the hidden power of sound and vibration. What if the sea didn't part because of a miracle or a volcano, but because of technology? What if Moses' staff was actually some kind of sound resonator, a lost device that once activated produced a specific frequency? A frequency so strong it could literally push water aside, opening a path through acoustic levitation. This sonic device could have held the water back, only to be turned off once the army was inside. Whether it was a volcano, a superweapon, or ancient technology, all these theories point toward the same conclusion. Something happened in that gulf. Something powerful enough to erase an army from the face of the earth, leaving its remains behind to be slowly fossilized in coral, waiting to be discovered. But if the proof exists, why the silence? What are they hiding? This question takes us to the center of the title, the true core of this entire mystery. Why are Egyptologists and mainstream archaeologists so silent? It isn't because of wonder. It isn't because of excitement. It comes from a mix of deep academic disbelief, professional self-protection, and maybe even a real unsettling fear of what this discovery could mean for the world. Here's the situation. For more than 100 years, the majority of secular Egyptologists have agreed that the Exodus, as described in the Bible, never happened, at least not in the massive, dramatic way the story describes. This idea is taught in universities everywhere, from Cairo to Harvard. It appears in textbooks and academic research. It has become the accepted belief. Their reasoning is simple. They say there is no archaeological evidence in the Sinai Desert for 2 million people, a population as large as a modern city wandering for 40 years. They ask, where are the campsites? Where are the mass burials? Where is the pottery? They also point out that no Egyptian hieroglyph, no papyrus record ever mentions their entire army, their most valuable military force, their chariot warriors, being wiped out in a single disastrous day. The whole structure of modern Egyptology, its timelines, its king lists, its view of the 18th dynasty's power, its understanding of history, is built on a framework that does not include this event. It's a framework that simply cannot include it. For them, it's a legend, a powerful cultural story, but still a legend. Then suddenly, a group of divers following the map of a man named Ron Wyatt, someone the serious academic world dismissed as a crank, a fraud, a religious dreamer, discovers a huge underwater debris field. A field that doesn't just hint at the story, it seems to match it almost perfectly. We're not talking about 1 or 2 broken artifacts. We're talking about hundreds of chariots, wheels, axles, and chariot parts scattered across the seabed. And not just random chariots, the exact 6-spoke and 8-spoke designs used by the Egyptian army during the 18th dynasty, the precise historical period in the precise location. A massive natural land bridge stretches across the deep gulf with the exact geography the story suggests. If this site truly exists, then the experts were wrong, and that would be a massive understatement. This discovery doesn't just add a new page to history, it rips out all the old ones. It would mean the ancient writings were not just stories, but real, literal historical records. A tenured professor who spent their entire 30-year career, their whole reputation defending the Exodus as myth theory, cannot suddenly turn around and say, "Oops, looks like that nurse from Tennessee was right all along." Their career would collapse. Their life's work would lose meaning. Every book they wrote would turn into fiction. Every student they trained would have been taught something untrue. So they stay frozen. They remain silent. The safest response is to ignore it, attack the source and label it unverified, pseudoscience, or misinterpreted. They argue it's simply a shipwreck graveyard from many different periods. Even though the evidence suggests one huge chaotic disaster, they claim the coral-covered wheels are just coral shapes or modern debris. Even when the forms are obvious, they demand impossible levels of proof for this single site while accepting far less evidence for their own favorite ideas. They act as gatekeepers, and this discovery is like a battering ram against their gates. They will never give even a small concession because giving an inch could bring their entire ivory tower crashing down. But the real wild theory goes even deeper. What if this isn't only about protecting a few academic careers? What if it reaches further into a global conspiracy? Think about it carefully. If this site were proven beyond any doubt to be the remains of Pharaoh's army, it would become physical, visible, scientific evidence of one of the central miracles of the Old Testament. In a world already filled with religious and political tension, imagine the impact. It could place one set of religious beliefs, supported by physical evidence, above many others. It would seem to validate the claims of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all at once. That wouldn't just shake the academic world. It would shake geopolitics. It would be like an earthquake. What about other religions around the world? What about strongly secular or atheistic governments that built their entire system on the belief that religion is only a myth? Do you think those powers would want billions of people suddenly seeing physical evidence of divine intervention in human history? It could become a geopolitical time bomb. It could threaten the balance of global influence. And when powerful groups face an uncomfortable truth, they rarely debate it openly. They bury it. They make the problem disappear. This is where the story becomes urgent. This is where it turns chilling. The evidence itself seems to be disappearing. Take the golden chariot wheel that Ron Wyatt said he discovered. According to him, it was a four-spoke wheel, the design used only by the highest royalty, possibly even the Pharaoh himself. He claimed he brought it to the surface, recorded it, and reported its discovery to Egyptian authorities, believing they would be thrilled. And then, suddenly, it vanished. There are no official photographs, no museum records, no formal statement. The single piece of evidence that could have confirmed the entire story simply disappeared. Skeptics, the same silent experts, laugh and say, "See, he invented the whole thing. It never existed." But what if he didn't invent it? What if it was confiscated? What if it was taken and locked away in a hidden vault, somewhere like the warehouse at the end of an adventure film? A secret so explosive that it could never be allowed to reach the light of day. It becomes worse. Much worse. The new 2024 expedition compared their advanced, high-resolution sonar maps with Wyatt's original maps and photos from the 1970s and 1980s, and what they reported is deeply unsettling. Large portions of the debris field appear to have been changed or cleared. Areas that Wyatt once described as packed with artifacts, spots he marked as chariot parts and skeletal remains, now look strangely empty. Is this simply natural erosion? Could it just be the powerful currents of the Red Sea that have been moving for 3,500 years? Or could it be a deliberate cleanup? The new research team says they noticed drag marks across the seabed, marks suggesting that large objects were hooked and pulled away. This doesn't look like nature at work. It looks precise and intentional. Is it possible that during the 40 years since Wyatt first discovered the site, someone has been quietly and carefully removing the evidence, slowly erasing the history from the ocean floor? We are now racing against time. The site itself is extremely fragile. The coral fossils, along with human and horse remains trapped in mineral layers, are slowly being worn away by ocean currents. But the human factor, That may be the real danger. The experts appear frozen because they are standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind them lies their entire career, their reputation, and the comfortable academic world they have built. In front of them stretches a dark, deep gulf filled with impossible evidence, evidence that could pull them and the entire structure of accepted history under the surface. And while they remain silent and unmoving, something else may be happening in the shadows. The evidence is disappearing. The truth may not simply be ignored. It might be deliberately and systematically erased. So what is this really? The greatest archaeological discovery in history, or a huge hoax that has lasted 40 years? And if it is real, who would be so desperate to make it vanish? Tell us what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.